The boy lay still, pale and fading, while beside him an old German shepherd pressed his head against the bed, too tired to move, yet refusing to leave. In that silence, between life and goodbye, something miraculous happened. The sharp scent of antiseptic floated heavily in the corridors of Bristhaven General Hospital, where the walls wore the pale fatigue of long-forgotten battles between hope and despair. On the fourth floor, tucked away from the main hum of activity, was room 406, a sterile, too-quiet sanctuary where 8-year-old Elio Varon lay between the thinning veil of life and the deep chasm beyond. Elio was a small boy, pale as milk, with thin wrists lost beneath the heavy folds of the hospital blanket. His hair, once a mess of golden curls, clung damply to his forehead, and his face, though still bearing the roundness of youth, seemed far too fragile for his years. Beneath closed lids, his long lashes trembled faintly with each labored breath, and the heart monitor beside him offered its reluctant rhythm, a sluggish, uncertain beat that seemed to fight against surrender. Beside the bed, on a tattered fleece blanket brought from home, lay Fenrir, Elio's German shepherd. Fenrir was a striking figure even in stillness, with a thick coat of black and tan fur that shone dimly under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was 5 years old, large and powerful, but now there was a solemn weight to his frame, as if he carried the entire world pressed against his broad shoulders. His intelligent amber eyes never strayed far from Elio's hand, resting just inches from his muzzle. Fenrir's presence was a constant, a silent guard against the dark, and though nurses came and went, whispering condolences to one another, Fenrir remained unmoving, an ancient sentinel against the inevitable. The attending physician, Dr. Callum Hargrove, had visited earlier that morning. A man of 50, with silver-streaked hair and deep-set lines across his sunburnt face, Dr. Hargrove was known for his gentle but unflinching honesty. Years of delivering bad news had weighed down his posture, giving him a slight stoop as if the grief of hundreds of families had settled permanently in his bones. When he spoke to Elio's parents, Emily and Matthias Varon, his voice was low and sorrowful, offering no illusions. "His heart is too weak," he said, his Scottish accent softening the brutal truth. "I'm so sorry. We've done all we can." Amelie, a slender woman with the chestnut hair pinned into a neat chignon and weary blue eyes that once sparkled with laughter, sat hunched over Elio's bedside, her hands trembling as she clutched the boy's tiny fingers. The loss of her older sister to leukemia years before had already carved sorrowful hollows into her heart, and now she faced the possibility of losing her only child. Matthias, a tall man with dark, curling hair and a rugged build earned from years of carpentry, stood stiffly beside her, his hands uselessly opening and closing at his sides, the terror of helplessness etched deep into his usually steadfast gaze. Outside room 406, the corridor buzzed faintly with the low murmur of hospital life. It was here that Lucien Moreau, a boy of 10 with a mop of unruly brown hair and wide gray eyes that seldom met another's gaze, found himself wandering after a tense appointment with his therapist. Lucien lived just 2 streets away from the Varens, though he had never spoken to Elio directly. A diagnosis of social anxiety had shadowed Lucien's childhood, fencing him off from the vibrant chaos of playgrounds and birthday parties. His world was smaller, quieter, built of books, whispered conversations with his older sister, and cautious daydreams behind safe windows. Today, Lucien had wriggled free from his sister's gentle grip and now drifted through the 4th floor, trailing his fingertips along the cold wall tiles. It was the faint sound of shallow breathing that drew his attention, a sound different from the mechanical sighs of the hospital, and when he peered around the corner, he froze. There, Through the half-open door of room 406, he saw Fenrir. To Lucian, the German Shepherd was magnificent, not fearsome. Despite the dog's imposing size, there was a sadness in the way he lay so still, a silent courage that tugged at something deep within the boy's guarded heart. Without thinking, Lucian inched closer, his hands curling nervously in the sleeves of his sweater. From down the hall came Celeste Moreau, Lucian's sister, a young woman of 28 who had recently completed her residency and was now working nights at Bristhaven General. Celeste had inherited the same gray eyes as her brother, but bore none of his hesitations. Her long dark hair was always tied in a no-nonsense ponytail, and her slender figure moved with a purposeful grace honed by years of disciplined study and countless sleepless shifts. Despite her professionalism, Celeste carried a deep empathy, a quality born not of her textbooks, but of the years she spent helping Lucian navigate a world that often seemed too loud, too fast, and too cruel. She spotted her brother standing silently near the doorway and quickened her steps, concern flashing across her face. "Lucien," she said softly, not wanting to startle him, "you can't wander off like that." Lucian didn't answer immediately. He was staring, transfixed, at Fenrir. Celeste followed his gaze and felt a quiet jolt of recognition. There was something about the dog, his unwavering stillness, his solemn watchfulness, that pulled at her attention. The door creaked slightly as Celeste pushed it further open, revealing the full heartbreak of the scene. A little boy barely clinging to life, a mother with grief hollowing out her soul, a father breaking silently beside her, and the noble dog whose loyalty seemed to defy even the looming specter of death. Celeste's hand tightened gently on Lucian's shoulder, grounding him, but her own heart ached at the sight. For a moment the world seemed to pause. Even the hospital sounds, the distant beeping, the shuffling of nurses, faded away into an almost sacred silence. Fenrir lifted his head slightly, his tired eyes meeting Lucien's across the room, and in that brief connection, something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, sorrow, and a flicker of fragile hope. Celeste knelt to Lucien's level, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name is Fenrir," she said. "He's taking care of someone very important." Lucien swallowed hard and nodded, his throat tight with feelings he couldn't name. He didn't need the full story to understand the gravity of what he was witnessing. Sometimes words only got in the way of what the heart already knew. Behind them, Elio stirred faintly in his sleep, a soft murmur escaping his lips, though his eyes remained closed. Amelie looked up sharply, a flicker of desperate hope crossing her features. Matthias straightened, his face taut with restrained emotion. Dr. Hargrove, passing by on his rounds, paused at the door, his professional detachment cracking slightly at the sight of the dog still holding vigil. As the evening deepened into night, and the corridors emptied into hushed shadows, Fenrir remained steadfast. He did not sleep. He did not move. He simply stayed, breathing in tandem with the boy he refused to abandon. And somewhere, just beyond the sterile walls of room 406, something ancient and unseen stirred. An invisible thread tying boy and dog closer together, binding them against the encroaching dark. Little did they know, the night ahead would bring a shift that neither medicine nor reason could ever fully explain. The night had fallen heavy over Bristhaven General Hospital, pressing its silent chill against the window panes like a breath from something ancient and unseen. In room 406, the only light came from the monitor's blinking eyes and the pale glow of the full moon, which poured through the single uncovered window in a river of silver. Fenrir stirred for the first time in hours, his thick fur shivering faintly under the spectral light. The German Shepherd, usually steady and grounded, now seemed agitated. Ears flicking, muscles tense beneath his worn coat as though hearing a call no human could perceive. Elio remained unconscious, his small chest barely rising under the weight of struggling lungs. Amelie Varen, with her hands clasped in silent prayer against her lips, kept her vigil beside her son. Her back was rigid from hours of sitting in the same position, her tailored coat slipping off one shoulder, unnoticed. Matthias Varen stood behind her, arms crossed over his broad chest, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, the carpenter's calluses on his hands gripping the fabric of his jeans tightly as if anchoring himself against despair. In the quietude of the room something shifted, subtle at first, like the faint tremor before an earthquake. Fenrir, whose body had been pressed against the floor for so long he seemed a part of it, lifted his head and locked his gaze onto the window. The moon, immense and blinding, stared back. Without a sound, the dog rose to his feet, his powerful form seeming to tremble with unseen energy. He moved to Elio's bedside with the cautious reverence of a pilgrim approaching a shrine, then, with a sudden and breathtaking grace, leaped onto the bed. Emily gasped and half rose from her chair, her instinct to scold or pull Fenrir back warring against the desperate knowledge that nothing else had worked. Matthias moved forward as well, but stopped at the sight of what happened next. Fenrir lay down alongside Elio, curling his massive frame carefully around the boy's frail body, his broad chest pressed gently against Elio's side. He rested his head atop Elio's small hand, the one still connected to a maze of IV lines, and then, as if the moonlight itself had stitched the moment together, the heart monitor that had been irregular and sluggish for so long suddenly picked up a stronger, steadier rhythm. The beeping grew louder, faster, almost joyful. Amelie's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks unchecked. Matthias let out a shuddering breath and reached out to grip her shoulder. Neither spoke. There were no words vast enough to hold what they felt. The door burst open as Dr. Callum Hargrove entered, still buttoning the white coat hastily thrown over his sleep-creased scrubs. Behind him trailed Nurse Elena Voss, a tall woman in her early 30s, with sleek dark hair cut into a sharp bob and the precise, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen too many nights like this end the wrong way. Elena was known among the staff for her practical mind and brisk efficiency, but even she hesitated as she took in the sight before her. Dr. Hargrove moved swiftly to the monitors, frowning deeply as he read the new vitals. That's not possible," he muttered under his breath. He adjusted the leads, checking connections, tapping the machines, looking for any mechanical error to explain away the miracle unfurling before him. When nothing malfunctioned, he turned back toward the family, his gruff features softening with a dawning confusion. Amelie could hardly breathe. She reached out to stroke Elio's forehead, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the boy's skin was not ice-cold, but faintly warm. Matthias, overwhelmed, sank into the nearby chair, his face buried in his hands as silent sobs racked his broad shoulders. Meanwhile, in the dim hallway just beyond room 406, Lucien Moreau sat cross-legged on the cold tile floor, a battered sketchpad balanced on his knees. A box of colored pencils lay beside him, its lid askew, the vibrant hues scattered like fallen leaves. Lucien, in his oversized woolen sweater and scuffed sneakers, was entirely absorbed in his drawing. His slim fingers moved deftly, shaping the figure of Fenrir, the bold lines of the dog's back, the soft curves of fur, the piercing intelligence in his eyes. There was no audience for his art, no encouragement save the quiet sense that capturing Fenrir's spirit on paper gave him courage too. Further down the hall, Celeste Moreau flipped through patient files on her tablet, her brow furrowed. She wore a navy blue cardigan over her scrubs, the sleeves pushed up to reveal delicate wrists adorned with a single silver bracelet, a gift from Lucien on her medical school graduation day. Celeste was methodical, her mind sharp with clinical reasoning, but tonight she found herself grappling with something beyond her training. Assigned to assist with Elio's case after the shift turnover, Celeste had quickly reviewed the charts. Irreversible cardiomyopathy, poor response to treatment. DNR, do not resuscitate, order filed under cautious advisement. Yet, here she was, peeking through the glass pane into room 406, witnessing a dog defying every law of medicine she had ever learned. She entered quietly, nodding respectfully to Dr. Hargrove, who glanced at her and gave a slight, helpless shrug. Without needing to be asked, Celeste moved to the foot of Elio's bed, noting the dog's steady breathing, the synchronized rise and fall of the chest against chest. Fenrir's presence wasn't chaotic, it was anchoring, stabilizing, healing. Celeste pulled out her stethoscope and hesitated before proceeding. She crouched by Fenrir first, letting the dog sniff her hand. Fenrir's ears flicked, but he made no move to object. His gaze, molten amber, held hers for a long, searching second before turning back to Elio. "Permission to stay?" Celeste murmured, half to the dog, half to the room. Matthias nodded, voice hoarse with emotion. "Please." In the silence that followed, Celeste noted Elio's improved color, the rhythmic strength of his pulse, the warmth that now radiated from his skin. She made meticulous notes, though every line defied the sterile expectations she had been taught. Outside, Lucien completed his sketch. He shaded in the moonlight with silver crayon, casting Fenrir in a halo of soft glow. For the first time in many years, Lucien smiled. A small, tremulous thing, but real. The corridor lights dimmed for the night shift. The city beyond the windows stretched out in a tapestry of sleeping streets and glittering towers, the full moon reigning high. Inside room 406, hope, fragile, flickering, was being stitched back together not by doctors, not by medicine, but by the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog. As Amelie pressed a kiss against Elio's temple and Matthias silently squeezed her hand, Celeste stepped back and watched the impossible unfold with a reverence she could not name. Behind her, Nurse Elena stood still as a statue, her professional detachment abandoned somewhere between disbelief and awe. In the hallway, Lucien hugged the sketchpad tightly to his chest, as if it were a shield, his heart full of something he had nearly forgotten how to feel. Belonging. And above it all, the moonlight bathed them in its ancient, watchful gaze, as if blessing the beginning of something miraculous that no one yet fully understood. The sterile air of Bristhaven General Hospital was heavy with the scent of old linens and fresh antiseptic as the new day's first reluctant rays slipped through the windows of room 406. Elio Varin, the boy who had hovered so long at the edge of life, stirred beneath the thin hospital blanket, his fingers twitching against Fenrir's dense fur. The heart monitor's rhythmic beeping echoed quietly, steady and strong, as if some hidden war had been won in the dark hours. Amelie Varin, her elegant frame bent in a posture of exhausted vigilance, blinked back tears as she leaned closer, brushing a trembling hand across her son's cheek. Matthias stood rigid at the foot of the bed, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his faded jeans, his rugged face carved into lines of cautious hope and disbelief. Fenrir remained curled tightly against Elio's side, his breathing slow but even, his thick black and tan coat rising and falling in perfect synchrony with the boy's. Though his muscles twitched faintly with each breath, the dog's steadfast gaze remained fixed on Elio, as if daring the shadows to come closer again. Elio's eyelids fluttered open, revealing the ocean-deep blue of his eyes, dulled by days of unconsciousness but burning now with a faint spark. His lips, pale and cracked, moved soundlessly for a moment before forming a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the beeping machines. "Mom!" Emily choked on a sob of relief, cradling his hand in both of hers. "I'm here, darling. I'm here," she murmured, tears slipping freely down her face. Matthias stepped closer, one massive hand resting protectively on his son's small shoulder. Elio's gaze drifted downward toward Fenrir, and a fragile smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "He was there," Elio rasped, voice no stronger than a breath of wind. "In the dark, when it was so cold, it was Fenrir. He was the light." Emily's breath hitched. She glanced helplessly at Matthias, whose jaw tightened against the rising tide of emotion. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. Elio closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. There was this place, black and endless. I was so scared. I thought I was gone, but then... His fingers twitched against Fenrir's fur. "He found me. Fenrir, he told me. Not yet, Elio. It's not time. He showed me the way back." The room fell into a reverent silence, broken only by the quiet hum of machines and the boy's raspy breathing. Dr. Callum Hargrove, who had entered silently moments earlier with his ever-present clipboard, paused at the doorway, his weathered face unusually gentle. He was a man molded by decades of scientific certainty, yet something about Elio's words rooted him to the spot, stirring uncomfortable questions he could not voice. Across the hall, sitting cross-legged against the cream-colored wall, Lucien Moreau clutched his sketchpad to his chest. His unruly brown hair fell into his pale, serious face as he hunched over his latest drawing, a vivid image of Fenrir bathed in moonlight, standing proud and vigilant. The boy's thin frame seemed almost smaller in the oversized gray hoodie he wore, sleeves swallowed up past his fingertips. For months, Lucien had struggled with the invisible chains of social anxiety that rendered speech into a battlefield he could not cross. Words had felt like too many sharp edges, too many traps. But now, sitting quietly in the hallway just beyond room 406, something inside him shifted. As Celeste Moreau approached, her tablet tucked under one arm and a cup of bitter hospital coffee clutched in the other, she slowed when she saw him. Her heart, already tender from the night's events, softened further at the sight of her brother drawing with such absorbed intensity. Celeste was dressed in deep navy scrubs under a lightweight gray jacket, her hair pulled into a tight, functional braid. Years of caring for Lucien had made her both fiercely protective and infinitely patient, shaping her into the kind of doctor who listened first and prescribed second. Lucien looked up at her, his gray eyes large and unsure, but when he spoke his voice was clear enough to carry across the space between them. "Fenrir's a hero," he said simply. Celeste blinked, momentarily stunned. It was the first spontaneous sentence she'd heard from Lucien toward anyone outside their tiny circle in nearly a year. She crouched beside him, careful not to startle the fragile bridge he had just extended. "Yes," she said softly. "He really is." Lucien looked back down at his drawing, tracing Fenrir's powerful form with careful strokes. "He found Elio," he whispered. "He kept him from getting lost." Inside room 406, Elio's energy was fading, but the light in his eyes remained. "Don't let Fenrir go," he whispered to his parents, his small hand gripping weakly at his mother's. "He's tired, but he stayed for me." Emily leaned down to kiss his forehead. "He's not going anywhere, my love," she promised, glancing over at Fenrir's still figure. The dog's breathing was steady but laborious, his great body worn thin by whatever battle he had waged for Elio's soul. Celeste entered quietly then, nodding respectfully to the Varans before moving to check the monitors. Her heart clenched at the sight of Elio awake and fighting. She tapped data into her tablet with steady fingers but couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something extraordinary had taken place, something beyond the reach of science or reason. As she worked, her eyes kept drifting to Fenrir. She noted how the dog's ears would twitch faintly whenever Elio moved, how his breathing synchronized with the boy's almost instinctively. There was a thread between them, invisible but tangible, woven from something deeper than flesh and bone, a bond of survival, of love, and of something else Celeste dared not name aloud. Lucien wandered to the doorway, holding up his sketchbook shyly. Amelie noticed and beckoned him forward with a soft smile. "Did you draw that for Elio?" she asked, her voice warm despite the tremor of emotion still lingering there. Lucien nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he offered the drawing. Elio's eyes widened as he looked at it, a powerful image of Fenrir surrounded by shafts of silver light, his body casting long shadows over the dark. Elio reached for the paper with the fingers that still trembled but found their mark. "It's perfect," he whispered, smiling at Lucien, who ducked his head but smiled back, a real, if fleeting, smile. In that moment, a fragile miracle unfolded. Not one wrought by medicine or machines, but by the simple, impossible power of connection. Fenrir's presence had not only pulled Elio back from the darkness, but had quietly mended something long broken in another soul just beyond the room's threshold. Celeste knelt beside Lucien, wrapping an arm around his thin shoulders. She pressed a kiss against his hair, breathing in the scent of paper and graphite and something purer, hope. Inside, Fenrir shifted slightly, his tired eyes blinking slowly at the gathering around Elio's bed. There was no strength for wagging tails or playful barks, only the profound, silent contentment of a guardian who had done his duty and asked for nothing in return. Outside, morning bloomed in soft golds and pinks over Bristhaven, and for the first time in many months, the hallways of the fourth floor felt less like corridors of sorrow and more like pathways to something beginning anew. The days that followed Elio's awakening unfolded in a strange, delicate rhythm, as though time itself was holding its breath within the sterile corridors of Bristhaven General. Word of his recovery spread in murmurs through the hospital, a quiet marvel that drew lingering glances from passing nurses and doctors alike. Elio Varan, once a pale whisper clinging to existence, now sat upright against his pillow, speaking in soft but steady sentences, laughing in fragile bursts that filled room 406 with a warmth it had not known in weeks. His skin, though still thin and bruised by needles, glowed faintly with life, and the color returned slowly to his cheeks like a dawn reluctant but certain. But where Elio's light grew, Fenrir's began to wane. The German shepherd, once proud and imposing, now seemed to diminish with each passing day. His black and tan coat, once sleek and dense, shed in weary clumps along the floor. His once sharp, vigilant eyes sank deep into their sockets, dulled by an exhaustion no sleep could mend. Fenrir stopped eating entirely, ignoring even the special treats Amelie brought in her trembling hands. He drank little and moved less, spending long hours lying at the foot of Elio's bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow, laborious rhythms. Amelie noticed it first, her blue eyes darkening with worry as she stroked Fenrir's thinning fur. She was already gaunt herself, her tailored dresses hanging looser on her frame, the stress carving delicate hollows beneath her cheekbones. She whispered her concerns to Matthias, whose broad shoulders sagged further each day as helplessness gnawed at him anew. Matthias, ever the builder, the fixer, found it unbearable to watch something he could not repair unravel before his eyes. Dr. Callum Hargrove, too, could not ignore the growing decline. After a whispered consultation, it was decided that a specialist should be brought in. That afternoon, the doors to room 406 swung open to admit Dr. Sylvie Durant, a local veterinarian known for her intuitive touch with animals. Sylvie was a slight woman in her mid-40s, with short, copper-colored hair that framed her sun-freckled face in a lively halo. Her green eyes, sharp but kind, missed nothing as she stepped lightly into the room, the soft soles of her worn boots whispering against the linoleum. Sylvie crouched beside Fenrir without hesitation, offering a hand for him to sniff. Fenrir, true to form, did not react aggressively. He barely reacted at all, lifting his heavy head for a brief second before letting it fall back against the cool floor. Sylvie ran practiced hands along his spine, feeling the wasted muscles, noting the temperature of his breath, the sluggishness of his pulse. After a long examination conducted in a reverent silence, Sylvie straightened and turned to the Varans, who watched her with brittle hope. "He's not sick," she said quietly, smoothing her palms against the thighs of her jeans. "At least, not in the way we understand sickness. No infection, no injury. His body's simply exhausted. It's as if he's pouring all of himself into something else, and there's nothing left for him." Her words struck the room like a soft, fatal blow. Amelie pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, and Matthias turned away, fists clenching at his sides. Dr. Hargrove rubbed the bridge of his nose, muttering beneath his breath about things he could not chart on a clipboard. Elio listened too, his small hands knotting the blanket in his lap. He reached out and laid a hand gently atop Fenrir's battered head, his voice steady with an understanding no child should have to bear. "He gave me his strength," Elio said simply. Celeste Moreau, standing quietly at the back of the room, felt a shiver ripple down her spine. There was something happening here that transcended the sterile language of medicine and logic she had spent her life studying. She approached the bed slowly, her gray eyes thoughtful behind the smudged lenses of her reading glasses. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and another heavy moon rose over the city, Celeste proposed an idea. She gathered Elio's parents and Lucienne, who now sat daily in the hallway, always within sight of Fenrir, and spoke with the careful conviction of someone stepping onto sacred ground. "I think we need to help them anchor this bond," she said, "not just physically, but emotionally. Elio and Lucian, they're holding on to Fenrir, and maybe if they can give that connection a voice, it can strengthen them all." She proposed they start emotion journals, a way for both boys to express what Fenrir meant to them, to articulate the threads of feeling too large for spoken words. Amelie and Matthias agreed immediately, clinging to any shred of hope. Lucian, though hesitant at first, agreed after Celeste knelt before him and gently placed a small, leather-bound journal in his hands. The next morning, Lucian and Elio sat together for the first time, side by side on Elio's narrow hospital bed. The nurses, moved by the sight, tiptoed around the room, allowing the fragile moment to unfurl. Lucian hunched over his notebook, chewing the end of his pencil, while Elio, pale but determined, balanced his journal against his knees. Their words came slowly at first, stumbling like newborn fawns. But soon they filled the pages with careful, earnest lines. Fenrir, the protector. Fenrir, the light in the dark. Fenrir, the voice that called them back when they had almost let go. Lucienne drew pictures, rough but heartfelt, A Fenrir standing against an endless night, his golden eyes fierce with loyalty. Elio wrote clumsy but beautiful sentences describing the dreams he barely remembered. Dreams where Fenrir stood between him and an ocean of shadow, holding back the tide. Celeste collected the journals each evening, reading the entries with a mixture of awe and aching tenderness. She noticed patterns, how both boys described Fenrir not as a dog, but as a guide, almost human in his wisdom, ancient beyond his years. They did not speak of Fenrir merely as a pet or companion, but as a force, a beacon against despair. The journals became more than therapy. They became a testament to something deep and holy, something that logic balked at but hearts understood instinctively. And though Fenrir continued to weaken, lying curled like a worn banner at the foot of Elio's bed, there was a dignity to his slow decline, as if he knew that his sacrifice had not gone unnoticed, that every ounce of himself he had given had been woven into something enduring. Outside, Brist Haven's streets flickered with the first tentative signs of spring, buds trembling on skeletal trees, rain cleaning the soot from old bricks. Inside room 406, life, fragile and miraculous, unfurled anew in the space between a boy, a dog, and a love that refused to be ordinary. The hospital seemed to hold its breath as evening deepened into a velvet stillness, the fluorescent hum dimming to a low, sleepy buzz in the deserted corridors. Outside, the city of Bristhaven wore a coat of mist, its yellowed streetlights casting long blurred shadows on the rain-slicked pavement. In room 406, however, time had folded itself into a smaller, quieter universe, where only the slow, steady beeping of monitors and the rhythmic breaths of a boy and his dog marked its passage. Elio Varen lay awake in his bed, a thin sheet tucked up to his chin, his body still fragile but somehow imbued with a quiet strength that had not been there before. The boy's blue eyes, once dull with sickness, now shimmered faintly in the half-light, reflecting the moon's pale glow. His golden hair, though thinner than it had been, caught the light in a halo of defiance. At the foot of the bed, Fenrir rested, his body curled protectively close, though now so gaunt that his ribs pressed sharply against his fading fur. His breathing was shallow but even, and when Elio shifted slightly, Fenrir's ears twitched in response, loyal even in his exhaustion. Amelie Varen sat beside her son, her slender frame wrapped in a thick gray shawl that failed to disguise the fatigue lining her delicate features. Her hands, once graceful with the casual elegance of a former ballet dancer, now trembled faintly as they brushed back her son's hair. She watched Elio with a mother's endless devotion, her heart torn between joy at his survival and grief at the price being paid at the foot of his bed. Matthias Varen, ever the silent pillar, dozed in the armchair pushed into the corner of the room, his broad chest rising and falling slowly beneath a threadbare flannel shirt. His rough hands, so used to crafting wood into beauty, now hung limp over the sides of the chair, as if even dreams were heavy with the burden of helplessness. In the soft darkness, Elio turned his head toward his mother, his voice a hoarse whisper against the hush. "Mama," he said, small fingers reaching for hers. Amelie caught his hand instantly, pressing it between both of hers, warming it as best she could. "I'm here, darling," she murmured. Elio's eyes filled with a solemn brightness beyond his years. "Fenrir is going to leave soon," he said, and his words carried a strange, heavy certainty that stilled the room. Amelie's breath caught in her throat. She stroked his hand, willing herself to stay strong. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "He told me," Elio said simply, his gaze drifting toward Fenrir. "Not with words, I just know. He said he's tired, that he stayed as long as he could, but he's not sad, Mama. He's proud." His small hand clutched hers tightly, his voice trembling only slightly. He said he'll still watch over us. Tears blurred Amelie's vision, but she blinked them away fiercely, forcing a smile as she brushed her lips against her son's forehead. "Then we'll be proud too, my love," she whispered. Elio, with the seriousness of one bearing a sacred mission, asked for paper and a pencil. Amelie fetched a small notepad from her purse, and Elio, sitting upright with a determination that seemed to sap what little strength he had, began to write. His handwriting was shaky, large letters sprawling unevenly across the page, but the message was clear and steady. "Dear Fenrir, thank you for finding me when I was lost. Thank you for staying when it was easier to go. I promise to live the life you saved, and I will be brave for both of us. I will not forget. I will make you proud too. Love, Elio." Amelie read the letter once, silently, her hand pressed over her heart, before folding it carefully and tucking it into the small collar Fenrir still wore, the tags jingling softly with the movement. Fenrir stirred slightly, his ears flicking, as if acknowledging the weight of the promise now bound to him. Meanwhile, down the hall, Lucien Moreau sat on the floor near the nurse's station. A bundle of colorful threads sprawled across his lap. The boy, usually so hesitant and cloaked in invisible barriers, worked with slow, painstaking care, his tongue poking slightly from the corner of his mouth in deep concentration. His small hands, thin and pale beneath the sleeves of his oversized sweater, wove and knotted the threads into a crude but earnest bracelet. Nurse Elena Voss, passing by with a clipboard, paused to watch him with a soft smile. Elena, always brisk and efficient on the surface, harbored a deep affection for children, a legacy of losing her younger brother to illness years before. She knelt beside Lucien, her dark bob swinging slightly as she crouched. "That's a fine bracelet you're making," she said gently. Lucien flushed but did not look away, a quiet pride shining in his gray eyes. "It's for Fenrir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but steady. "For Elio's hero." Elena's smile deepened, a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. She patted his shoulder lightly before moving on, leaving Lucien to finish his work under the soft hum of the hospital lights. When the bracelet was done, a simple band of blue and gold threads twisted together like a tiny banner of loyalty. Lucien rose and padded softly toward room 406. He hesitated at the door, heart thudding painfully in his chest, then took a deep breath and entered. Elio looked up and smiled when he saw him. Lucien shuffled forward, the bracelet clutched tightly in his hand. "I made this for Fenrir," he said awkwardly, his voice rough with unused muscles but filled with sincerity. Amelie, recognizing the immense effort behind the simple gesture, smiled through her tears. She gently nudged Fenrir's collar aside, and together, Elio and Lucien slipped the bracelet over the dog's paw, letting it settle against the thinning fur like a knight's final badge of honor. Fenrir shifted, letting out a deep, contented sigh that filled the room like a blessing. He did not lift his head, but his tail thumped once, weakly but unmistakably, against the floor. Lucien sat beside Elio without needing to be asked, the bond between the two boys no longer tentative but stitched together by shared sorrow, shared hope, and the silent, immeasurable gift of a dying hero. Outside, the mist thinned, revealing a clear sky studded with stars. The city exhaled in sleep, oblivious to the tiny miracle taking place in a hospital room where a boy and a dog, and now a friend, wove a tapestry of love stronger than the fading of a life. In that moment, none of them needed words to understand. Fenrir would soon leave the world, but he would never truly be gone. The night had folded itself tightly over Bristhaven, But as the first thin ribbons of dawn unraveled against the hospital windows, room 406 remained a world untouched by time. The city beyond the glass shimmered under a soft blush of gold and gray, but inside silence reigned, as sacred and brittle as spun glass. The heart monitors blinked their steady rhythms, the soft whir of the ventilation system the only sound that dared disturb the reverence. Fenrir lay curled at the foot of Elio's bed, his large body shrunken beneath the once proud black and tan fur, now matted and dulled by exhaustion beyond anything natural. His breathing came in short, shallow puffs, each rise and fall of his ribcage an act of monumental will. His head, heavy with unseen burdens, rested against the edge of the hospital mattress where Elio's small hand had slipped during sleep. His muzzle, once strong and commanding, now trembled faintly against the crisp white sheets. Elio Varon stirred in the pale light. His thin body, wrapped tightly in his hospital gown and blanket, shifted carefully as his mind clawed its way up from a depth of dreams. His eyelids fluttered, and then, slowly, steadily, he opened his eyes to the new day. Amelie Varon, who had dozed off in the chair beside him, started awake at the movement. Her shawl had slipped down to her elbows, and the soft lines of exhaustion carved deeper into her delicate face. She rubbed her bleary eyes and leaned forward, her heart lurching at the sight of her son, sitting up, truly sitting up for the first time in weeks, his back straight and fragile like a young sapling bending toward the light. Elio's gaze fell immediately on Fenrir. The boy's face crumpled into an expression of fierce tenderness as he reached out with a hand that no longer trembled with weakness. His fingers brushed lightly against Fenrir's ear. "Fenrir," he whispered, his voice cracking from disuse and overwhelming emotion. "Thank you for staying." The German shepherd's ears flickered at the sound of his name. Slowly, with an effort that seemed to pull from the deepest well of his spirit, Fenrir opened his eyes. They were no longer sharp and blazing as they once had been. Now they were soft pools of amber, heavy with a peace that needed no explanation. He lifted his head a fraction, the movement shaky but purposeful, and gazed at Elio with a look so full of pride, so full of quiet farewell, that it made Amelie's breath catch painfully in her throat. For a long, eternal heartbeat, boy and dog locked eyes. Two warriors who had fought a battle beyond understanding and had, against every odd, found their way back to each other. The door creaked open quietly behind them. Celeste Morrow stepped into the room. Her navy scrubs wrinkled from another sleepless night. Her long braid draped over one shoulder. Her gray eyes widened as she took in the sight before her. Elio upright, alert, life thrumming through him like a song reborn. Fenrir, though faded to a mere shadow of his former strength, completing the circle he had begun. Without speaking, Celeste moved to the monitors, her long fingers deftly tapping at the screens, eyes scanning the vitals with a concentration sharpened by disbelief. She pulled out a small portable unit from the medical cart, a newer model capable of more detailed physiological readings, and attached fresh leads to Elio's chest, her touch as gentle as snowfall. The results flashed across the screen. Celeste's brow furrowed first in suspicion, then in stunned wonder. Elio's heart, once a faltering bird desperate to take flight, now beat strong and even. His blood oxygen levels were optimal. His blood pressure sat squarely within normal range. Every indicator, every fragile miraculous sign, declared a recovery so profound it bordered on impossible. Celeste turned to Amelie, her voice hushed, reverent. "His charts, they're beyond expectation," she said, unable to hide the wonder trembling beneath her clinical tone. "We need to document this properly. It's not just recovery, it's rebirth." Amelie, tears brimming in her eyes, nodded wordlessly, her gaze never leaving Elio, who still leaned down, his forehead pressed lightly to Fenrir's side in a gesture of wordless gratitude. Meanwhile, outside room 406, Lucien Moreau leaned against the cool tile wall, clutching a cup of orange juice in one hand. His unruly brown hair stuck up at odd angles, his gray hoodie wrinkled from sleep. He watched the passing nurses with a new, unfamiliar calm. For the first time in what felt like forever, he did not shrink from their presence, did not pull the strings of silence tighter around himself. Nurse Elena Voss, carrying a tray of fresh linens, caught his eye and offered a small, genuine smile. Normally, Lucien would have dropped his gaze, retreating into himself. But today he did something different. He smiled back, a small, careful curve of his lips, and nodded. It was a tiny movement, barely noticeable to anyone passing by, but to Celeste, who glanced through the window and saw it unfold, it was a miracle of equal magnitude to the one blooming inside room 406. Later that morning, while Elio slept peacefully, his hand resting lightly on Fenrir's paw, Lucien ventured inside with his sketchpad tucked under his arm. He approached Celeste, his steps unsure but determined, and tugged gently at her sleeve. "I want to draw him," Lucien said, his voice small but clear, before he goes. Celeste crouched beside him, her heart swelling with fierce pride. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Then you should, sweetheart," she whispered. "He'll be honored." Lucien crossed to Elio's bed, settling into the chair Amelie had vacated. He opened his sketchbook, its pages filled now with the dozens of images of Fenrir, some rough, some vibrant with color and life. With a careful, almost reverent hand, he began to sketch anew. Fenrir as he was now, frail but beautiful, haloed by the soft morning light streaming through the windows. Each line was a love letter, a farewell, a celebration. Outside, the world of Bristhaven bustled into its ordinary day. Buses chugged along wet streets, shopkeepers raised their shutters, children in raincoats splashed through puddles on their way to school. But within the walls of room 406, the extraordinary unfolded quietly, like a secret whispered between hearts. And at the center of it all lay Fenrir, the tired guardian, the faithful companion, watching over the boy he had saved, his breathing slow, his spirit immense, woven now forever into the lives he had touched. The sun beamed through the great windows of Bristhaven General Hospital, casting long golden rectangles of light across the linoleum floors as the world outside awakened to the gentle promises of spring. Inside room 406, preparations for departure filled the air with a restless, humming energy. Nurses moved about with uncharacteristic smiles. Clipboards were checked and rechecked, and in the corner, a small suitcase bearing the scuffs of too many rushed visits stood packed and ready. Elio Varin sat in a wheelchair beside the bed he had once been too weak to leave, his frame still slight but pulsing now with a steady, vibrant life. His golden hair had begun to regain its luster, and his blue eyes, though ringed with the pale crescents of lingering frailty, shone brightly beneath the fringe of his bangs. Dressed in a simple gray sweatshirt and soft jeans too loose around his legs, Elio was a portrait of fragile triumph, a boy who had danced a hair's breadth from death and found his way back with love as his anchor. At his side stood Fenrir. The German shepherd, though diminished in size and strength, held himself upright with the same stubborn nobility that had carried him through countless sleepless nights. His once thick coat now lay thin against his ribs, his movements deliberate and cautious, but his spirit shone undimmed through the weary sag of his shoulders. The hospital staff, many of whom had wept in secret during the long, uncertain weeks, lined the hall to watch as the boy and his dog prepared to leave. Amelie Varin, wearing a soft blue cardigan and simple jeans, hovered near Elio, adjusting the blanket draped over his lap, her slender frame vibrating with nerves and joy. Her chestnut hair, pulled back into a loose braid, framed her delicate features, still shadowed by fatigue but glowing with a fierce maternal pride. Matthias Varin, towering behind them in his battered leather jacket and faded work boots, carried the suitcase with one hand and kept the other on Elio's shoulder, grounding them all. As the orderly, a stocky young man with a cheerful face and close-cropped auburn hair named Ben Whitaker, wheeled Elio toward the doors, Fenrir fell into step beside them. Each of his steps was measured, his paws whispering against the polished floors, his eyes never leaving Elio's face. Though it was clear the walk was a monumental effort, he moved with the determined grace of a knight escorting a prince from the battlefield. In the lobby, Celeste Moreau waited with Lucien beside her. Celeste, dressed in neatly pressed scrubs beneath a light gray coat, stood with her arms crossed lightly over her chest, a rare softness brightening her usually serious gray eyes. Lucien clutched a handmade sign in his hands, thick white cardboard with wobbly blue letters that spelled out "Welcome Home, Heroes." The ink smudged in a few places where nervous fingers had clutched too tightly. Lucien, his brown hair tamed only slightly by a hurried brush, wore a bright green hoodie and jeans scuffed at the knees. His face, still pale but lit from within by an excitement he struggled to contain, turned toward Elio as the wheelchair approached, and for the first time in memory, Lucien did not look away when strangers nearby glanced at him curiously. As Elio caught sight of the sign, he laughed, a breathless, unguarded sound that turned every head in the room. Fenrir's ears twitched at the sound, and though the dog's body sagged visibly from fatigue, his tail gave a faint, joyous thump against the floor. Ben paused at the main doors, beaming proudly. "You're a celebrity around here now, kid," he said to Elio, chuckling. "You and your four-legged miracle." The drive home to the modest Varin house passed in a quiet haze of sunlight and whispered promises. Their small home, nestled among rows of brick townhouses with ivy crawling up their facades, waited like an old friend with its door wide open. The front yard, once a neglected patch of grass, had been hastily tidied by neighbors who had followed Elio's journey from afar, a hopeful, silent vigil. Matthias carried Elio inside, his strong arms cradling the boy as easily as he had when Elio was a toddler. Amelie walked ahead, holding the door wide, her heart tight in her chest. Fenrir, mustering the last reserves of his strength, trotted across the threshold behind them, his tail wagging faintly, his tongue lolling slightly in tired triumph. The house smelled of fresh linen and cinnamon, Amelie's anxious baking spree of the past few days, and the living room had been rearranged to accommodate a soft, oversized dog bed placed strategically by the large window where Fenrir could watch the world outside. Matthias set Elio gently onto the worn couch, pulling the blanket up around his legs, while Fenrir collapsed with a sigh onto the waiting bed, resting his muzzle on crossed paws, content at last. It was then, as the family basked in the fragile warmth of being home again, that Lucien spoke up, his voice hesitant but earnest. "I have an idea," he said, fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. "I mean, if it's okay." Amelie, her hands busy tucking the blanket around Elio, looked up and smiled warmly. "Of course, Lucien. What is it?" Lucien bit his lip, then pulled a slightly crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it with trembling fingers. "I was thinking, maybe we could start something, like a group for kids like me, and Elio, and others who have had bad times. We could call it the Friends of Fenrir." His cheeks flushed, but he lifted his chin bravely. "We could tell them that they're not alone. That sometimes having a friend like Fenrir makes all the difference." Celeste, who had crouched down beside her brother, placed a hand gently on his back, pride shining in her soft smile. "That's a beautiful idea, Lucian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I think Fenrir would love that." Amelie nodded, her throat too tight for words, while Matthias clapped a large hand gently against Lucian's shoulder. "We'd be honored," he said gruffly. Plans began to form that very evening. Celeste offered to guide the project, using her knowledge of child psychology and therapy animals to build a program that could reach children struggling with fear, grief, and isolation. She envisioned a place where kids could come, meet therapy dogs, talk, draw, heal together. A legacy born from the loyalty of one extraordinary dog. As the afternoon faded into a golden evening, Elio drifted into a peaceful nap on the couch, his fingers tangled gently in Fenrir's thinning fur. Lucian sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, sketching plans for the club, a determined frown wrinkling his brow. Fenrir, tired but triumphant, watched over them all. His eyes half closed but his heart wide open, knowing deep down that his journey had not ended. It had simply found a new beginning in the lives he had touched so deeply. And in the warmth of that small, ordinary house, under a roof patched by hope and miracle alike, something extraordinary continued to grow. Chapter 8. A Light That Never Fades. The early summer sun spilled generously across the small neighborhood of Bristhaven, painting the lawns in brilliant greens and gilding the rooftops in warm gold. The Varen house, once silent and heavy with grief, now thrummed with the sweet, steady rhythm of ordinary life reborn. Laughter drifted through open windows where curtains swayed lazily in the breeze, and the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming lilacs perfumed the air like an unseen blessing. In the backyard, Elio Varen dashed across the lawn with the wild, uncontained energy of a boy newly reintroduced to the world. His golden hair, grown thick and tousled, bounced with every gleeful step. His slender frame, once so fragile, had filled out slightly with health, and his cheeks, sun-kissed and freckled, bore the soft pink of vitality. Dressed in simple denim shorts and a faded red t-shirt bearing a worn superhero emblem, he was a living testament to miracles stitched quietly in the dark. At the edge of the garden, beneath the generous shade of an old oak tree, lay Fenrir. The German shepherd, though aged and softened by his long vigil, watched Elio with bright, unwavering eyes. His coat, still bearing the scars of exhaustion, gleamed faintly in the dappled light, and while his steps were slower, his spirit burned with the fierce joy of a guardian who had fulfilled his sacred charge. Each time Elio's laughter rang through the air, Fenrir's tail thumped gently against the soft earth, his entire body seeming to hum with satisfaction. Amelie Varen sat on the wide wooden porch steps, her hands busy weaving a small crown of daisies, while she watched her son with a heart so full it ached. She wore a simple linen dress of pale blue, her chestnut hair tumbling loosely around her shoulders, the once permanent tension in her posture now replaced by an easy, graceful serenity. Matthias Varen, seated beside her in well-worn jeans and a plain white shirt, whittled a small piece of wood into the shape of a dog, the shavings gathering at his feet like curled whispers. His weathered hands moved with patient precision, and every few minutes his gaze lifted to follow Elio's every movement, pride radiating from him like a second sun. Inside the house, in the heart of the living room, hung a large framed portrait of Fenrir. It was a collaboration between Elio and Lucian, a piece born from afternoons of whispered ideas and shared pencil sketches. Fenrir's noble form was captured in brilliant strokes of charcoal and color. his amber eyes alight with an almost celestial glow. Above the mantel, where it hung, fresh flowers were placed each week, a small humble altar to love that had refused to yield. Lucien Moreau, taller now, his once hesitant frame now stretched into the early awkwardness of adolescence, stood admiring the portrait. His unruly brown hair had been trimmed into a shaggy mop, and a well-worn denim jacket, adorned with small hand-sewn patches, hung from his shoulders. Clutched in his hands was a copy of his first printed short story, newly bound with a soft blue cover embossed in gold, The Gatekeeper Between Life and Hope. The story, inspired by Fenrir and the journey that had saved them all, had been crafted with painstaking care over long afternoons at the library and late nights under the watchful eyes of Celeste. It told of a boy lost in a place without stars and the faithful dog who guided him back into the light. Lucien smiled shyly as he approached Elio, who immediately ran to him and pulled him into a fierce hug. Though Lucien still startled slightly at sudden contact, he relaxed into the embrace with a laugh, patting Elio's back in an awkward but genuine return of affection. Nearby, Celeste Moreau leaned against the porch railing, her arms crossed lightly over her chest. She wore a crisp, collared blouse tucked into jeans and a small silver pendant shaped like a paw print that glinted in the sunlight. Her gray eyes were softer now, laughter lines beginning to grace the corners from so many smiles hard won over the past months. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. A new email from the International Symposium on Animal-Assisted Therapy, inviting her to speak about the Friends of Fenrir and the extraordinary case that had captured hearts across the world. The club, born from Lucien's earnest suggestion, had blossomed into something no one could have imagined. What began as a few local children gathering weekly at the community center had spread across social media like wildfire. Stories of Fenrir's legacy inspiring countless families to believe again in healing and connection. Therapy dogs were now a common sight in Bristhaven's parks and hospitals, and Celeste, never one to seek attention, found herself at the heart of a movement. Elena Voss, the no-nonsense nurse whose brisk hands had once tended Elio's pale skin, now served as one of the club's volunteer coordinators. She stood beside Celeste now, a rare grin softening the sharp lines of her face. Dressed casually in jeans and sneakers, her dark hair tucked beneath a baseball cap, Elena sipped from a thermos of black coffee and watched the children play. "Not bad for a bunch of stubborn hearts," she remarked wryly, nudging Celeste with her elbow. Celeste laughed, low and genuine. The best miracles usually are. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching Elio chase a butterfly through the tall grass, Fenrir rising slowly to his feet and lumbering after him with patient devotion. The boy and the dog circled each other, a dance of pure, unfiltered joy that needed no language. As evening approached and the sun slipped lower in the sky, Matthias called Elio inside for dinner. Lucien lingered a moment longer at the edge of the porch, clutching his book. He gazed out at Fenrir, his gray eyes thoughtful, then turned back toward Celeste. "Do you think he knows?" Lucien asked quietly. "That he changed everything?" Celeste crouched beside her brother, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. "I think he knew from the very beginning," she said, her voice steady. "And he's still here, in every laugh, every step forward, every story you tell." Lucien nodded, blinking fast against the sudden sting in his eyes. He tucked the book carefully under his arm and followed Celeste inside, the screen door creaking gently shut behind them. In the living room, the soft clink of plates being set on the table mingled with the murmur of easy conversation. Fenrir padded slowly to his spot by the window, where he settled with a sigh, his eyes drifting closed as the first stars pricked the velvet sky outside. The portrait above the fireplace caught the last of the fading light. Fenrir's painted gaze seeming to watch over the home he had saved, the lives he had stitched back together with nothing but loyalty, patience, and an endless, unbreakable love. And though seasons would turn and years would pass, within the Varin house, and within every soul touched by Fenrir's story, the light he had kindled would never, ever fade. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or trumpets from the heavens. Sometimes they arrive softly, in the form of a loyal heart, a wagging tail, and the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog. Fenrir showed us that love itself can be a miracle, woven quietly into our everyday lives, waiting for us to recognize it. In a world often rushed and burdened by worries, it's easy to forget that God's grace often works through the humble and the quiet, through a tired old dog refusing to leave a boy's side, through a small act of kindness from a lonely child, through a family choosing hope when the darkness feels overwhelming. These are the fingerprints of the divine on our ordinary days, the soft whispers reminding us that no one fights alone, that love can resurrect what was once thought lost. Fenrir didn't just save Elio. He reminded all of us that sometimes the greatest warriors wear fur, and the most powerful prayers come without words. Perhaps God sent Fenrir not with grand miracles, but with the simple, mighty force of unconditional love, because sometimes love itself is the greatest miracle He gives us. So today, if you believe that small acts of love can light up the darkest nights, if you believe that miracles still walk among us, sometimes on four legs, if your heart was touched by Fenrir's story, please share this story to spread the hope. Comment below and tell us, has an animal ever touched your life in an unforgettable way? Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the hidden miracles around us. And may God bless and protect you and all those you love, always, in ways seen and unseen.